get away. Pot has poison and the mixture or two, they call it sugar of lead. If you drink the bootleg shine, you'll sure have an aching head. Sunday morn with snakes all around your bed? I know you have, I have too. I know I'd rather be dead. The preacher comes around and gives advice, and then you have to stall. But if he gets to the bottle first, you know he'll never leave you none at all. What's the matter in this land? They drink it wet and vote it dry, hide it if they can. They pitch a party and they all get drunk and call it society. But if they catch you with a pint, good morning penitentiary. Prohibition is just a scheme, a fine money-making machine. Carbolic acid and creosote ought to kill any man. Some get paralyzed, some get well, some hit the golden land. The undertaker has got to live, beat him if you can. Prohibition, say it again, it's money make a fine machine.
You are listening to Time for Hemp. I am your host, Casper Leitch. That was Jorma Kaukonen, and we are listening to a song about Prohibition today. And the reason being is because we are talking about that particular topic. This is hour 2 of the 4th of 5 conferences and in this particular 2-hour presentation, we are discussing the failed policies of prohibition and how they are destroying every aspect of society on Earth. I will turn the commentating back over to Peter Christ and Sean Dunagan here. Peter Christ and Sean, thank you for taking Time for Hemp.
Absolutely. Thank you, Casper. We're being joined by Neill Franklin, a retired Major Maryland State Police and current Executive Director of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and Larry Talley, Intelligence Specialist. And welcome aboard, gentlemen. And Sean, I'll hand it back to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Casper. I really appreciate the opportunity to be in on this discussion. As I mentioned earlier, this panel of guests is quite remarkable, and certainly on par with any panel of drug policy experts anywhere in terms of diversity of background and experience on the issue, and also with regard to their honest approach to the problems and what we can do to solve them. So just to kind of pick up back where we were discussing the marijuana issue, the reforms that have been made with regard to marijuana policy, and what that means for other drugs. So, Neill, Major Franklin, if you would, LEAP's position on drug reform, drug policy reform, is a little bit different and more broad, and I would say more comprehensive than a number of other organizations out there in this universe, in that you advocate not only for the legalization of marijuana, but of other drugs as well. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that strategy and that position and how you came to it.
Well, definitely for the legalization of not just other drugs, but all drugs. I didn't come to that realization. It was actually the founders of this wonderful organization, and one of which is on the show with us. That is Peter Criss, the other being Jack Cole. When they were thinking about this wonderful organization, I guess about 12 years ago, they realized that we had to consider all drugs. As a matter of fact, Peter consistently speaks to the fact that prohibition doesn't work. And I like the analogy that he uses of the very first law of prohibition, which was the fruit from the forbidden tree. It didn't work then, and it won't work today. The bottom line is that when you prohibit a substance that people want, that is readily available, that can be made available, and you prohibit it, you generate a very violent criminal marketplace for selling that product. That's what happened with alcohol prohibition back in the 1920s, and we have done it again here in the 1970s and up until this point today with the prohibition of other drugs, of which were legal at one time. All of these drugs that we currently prohibit today, from heroin to cocaine and others, were legal at one time. So the main reason that we at LEAP want to end prohibition for all of these drugs is, number one, which in my opinion is most important, and that is the violence. Not just the violence in this country, but globally, especially down through Central America, where the trafficking routes have become treasured by the cartel, valued by the cartel, generating billions of dollars for the cartel, all because the United States is pretty much the number one consumer of these drugs, making those trafficking routes very popular and very valuable. And number two, we want to restore the public trust in policing. Because of these policies of prohibition, we have created a very huge divide between police and the citizens of this country. And we need to restore that trust, and the most effective way we can do that is by ending the prohibition of drugs. So we're no longer violating the Fourth Amendment rights of our citizens, the Fifth Amendment rights of our citizens. If I'm not mistaken, earlier during the show, you guys were talking about civil forfeiture and how that is, in my opinion, a direct violation of the Fifth Amendment of our Constitution. The unwarranted searches, the wonderful dynamic entries we use on these search warrants and what have you. And the list is long, as you know. One more thing is that, unfortunately, in law enforcement in this country, we tend to target communities of color and poor communities, which has created a big problem as relates to the numbers and the numbers of people we're putting into prison who are from communities of color. And the wonderful book that was written by Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow, for your listeners who have not yet had the opportunity to read that book, I think they should. It's a good read. So it definitely points to another tragedy of the war on drugs, of the prohibition of drugs, as we continue to fill up our prisons with prisoners for drug use and drug selling, and predominantly those people in our prisons are disproportionately represented by blacks and people of color.
That's right. And, it's the racial disparity in how the drug war is prosecuted and its effects. It's sort of perplexing to a lot of people like me, right? In that, that I've certainly known and worked with a lot of cops during my time with DEA. I wouldn't characterize any of them as overtly racist. That's
right.
Not to say that they weren't. That was never my impression of any of them. And yet the effect of the drug war is clearly there's a disparate impact on communities of color, and as you mentioned, poor communities, and in parts of our country on the American Indian communities as well. And I was wondering, how does that happen? You were with the Maryland State Police and the Baltimore Police Department for a total of 34 years. You certainly witnessed as much on the ground drug law enforcement as probably anyone alive. How does that happen? Why is that the net effect? Is it access to counsel? Is it deliberate on the part of law enforcement? Is it institutional? Is it something about our laws? Kind of why do we have this problem with the net effect of the drug war?
That's a great question. And see, it's not just a bad policy. It's a bad application of the policy as well. And how does that happen? It happens for a number of reasons. Even though we know that blacks and whites and just about every demographic you look at in this country use and distribute drugs at relatively the same rates, we tend to have this disproportionate number when it comes to who we target, who we charge, who we convict, and who gets longer sentences. So it's also an improper application of the policy. So how do we end up targeting communities of color at this disproportionate level? Well, first of all, it begins with most of our communities of color in our urban centers are poor communities. And when I say poor, I don't just mean financially poor. I mean politically poor. They have no political power. Once we started this vicious cycle of sending poor people into prison, blacks into prison, in many of our communities, when they return to society, they still have no voting rights or power. Therefore, they have no political influence, no muscle there. And it's easier for policing to implement, to practice, or to put in force this policy in communities of color, because there's very little, if any, pushback. Now, don't get me wrong. There is a difference between how drugs are distributed within many of our poorer communities than how they are distributed in affluent America, gated America. We have open-air drug markets. Yes, we do have the violence in our streets, the shootings, the running gun battles, and the drive-by shootings. Policing is a numbers game. Unfortunately, that's where we are today. The political powers of our cities and the policing hierarchy are requiring our police officers to go out there and to produce numbers. So why do they want numbers? One of the main reasons they want numbers is for burn grant applications, for federal grants, federal grant money. We need numbers to put in the applications to demonstrate that we have this drug problem, which is really a drug prohibition problem in our communities. So, the easiest way to get those numbers is to clear corners. We have drug dealers standing on corners. We have kids standing on corners peddling drugs. We have plenty of people coming up and buying those drugs. So we have plenty of users, those who are addicted. And it's very easy to go into such a community and just round up people. The quality of the arrest does not matter. because in policing, we no longer look at or are concerned about conviction rates. It's all about the arrest. We don't dare go into gated America. We don't dare take drug dogs into Roland Park in Baltimore, Maryland, which is due north of downtown, and start scanning cars along the street, or doing knock and talks on, at these prestigious homes where we know they have parties on occasion. We don't dare go to one of the affluent high schools and scan the cars in the parking lots of the students, because we would be getting phone calls, not the police, but the chief and the mayor and the city council members would be getting the phone calls, and that would soon stop. So those are just a couple of quick reasons as to why we tend to target communities of color, poor communities, as it relates to enforcing these drug policies.
Neill, when you mentioned that, I worked in a very melanin deficient community for 20 years. And we had just as much drug use in that community as any place else in America. But one of the big differences is, and you touched on, I just wanted to add this to it, in the inner city, as you said, it's open marketplace. It's out of the street. In the suburbs, I call it dining room marketplace. Mm-hmm. And basically the way most of the dealing is done in the suburbs is there's a group of people, and they have one person who's got a connection who goes get the drugs for everybody else. And then they come back and they meet at one house over the dining room table, and they distribute the drugs. And that guy that's getting it isn't looking for any new customers. He's in it or she's in it because they get their drugs for free because they run and get it for everybody else. And it's very difficult to get a narc into that type of operation. And it's not out on the street corner. So a lot of it is that marketplace. But there is also a huge racial component to this thing. You got to remember that during alcohol prohibition, the vast number of people we locked up were Catholic, Italians, and Irish, and Jews. They were the underground marketplace. And the reason wasn't because there was something genetically wrong with those people. The reason was because they were pushed out because of being Catholic and Jews in this society, the early part of the 20th century. They were pushed out of the regular marketplace. My mother, who was born in 1904, remembers reading in the Buffalo newspaper in the teens, and there would be ads that would say man needed to do work, and the last line of the ad would say Catholics need not apply. So there's been an extended racial component to all of our drug laws. Larry, you with us?
Yes, sir, I am.
Yeah, you want to get in here?
Sure. How are you guys doing today? This sounds
like
Larry. A lot of
fun. Just for anyone who might have missed the introduction, Larry Talley is a 20-year veteran of the Navy, doing counter-drug work for seemingly quite a bit of that. 7 of those years with the Naval Special Warfare Unit in Panama, doing counter-drug, I imagine some interdiction and also eradication work with the DEA and with just the Navy. So certainly a unique and interesting perspective on this topic.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, the military aspect or paradigm of the drug war is significantly different than the man on the ground who's dealing with the end users. I joined the Navy in the 80s, and I'd never intended to get into the drug war. My job, I wanted to be an intelligence guy and do all kinds of stuff with the bad guys. And, my first job was they put me on a ship. I was in an intel. They put me on a ship, and the first thing that I did was help to assimilate a 19-ton marijuana bust from a bunch of Rastafarians on rafts that were coming out of Grenada. So, since then, I've changed my perspective. As a kid and early in the Navy and wanting to do the right thing, I learned that, prohibition just very simply, and I mean prohibition of all drugs, just simply doesn't work. And we learned that during the alcohol prohibition. Now, in the 4 decades since President Nixon has declared a war on drugs, now our strategies remain pretty much unchanged. And in fact, our society's turned into the world's largest industrial prison complex, with more than 25% of the world's prison population. I think we browbeat that one to death. But, while the annual counter-drug budget's ballooned to $25 billion every year, the availability of our illicit drugs here in the United States remains at an all-time high. I can remember wanting to charge through a drug-free America by 1995 and then 1996. And then we gave up. We took away the Cali and the Medellin cartels. I was involved in that. And those were the cocaine cartels that were bringing lots of cocaine into the 80s, into southern Florida, Miami Vice. and that time period, and Scarface. Well, we got rid of those Cali and the Medellin cartels, and then it became a distributed effort of drug distributing, and we've lost control. Now, since then, we've lost a lot of people. Nearly 40,000 drug-related deaths here in the United States every year. That's 40,000 drug-related deaths every year here in the United States. More than 60,000 deaths in Mexico. The global drug trade now accounts for about 1% of all commerce on the planet. And we pursued essentially the same flawed supply reduction strategy for years. And that's where the military was involved in that supply reduction strategy through interdiction. Interdiction means that we go bust boats that have coke on it. We find the motherships. We try to interdict the drug trade, but really we're accounting for just a very small piece, micro percentage of the drug trade by spending billions of dollars of our tax dollars trying to do that. Now, we have wasted, let's talk about the overall, we've wasted $1.5 trillion arrested, jailing, and killing our citizens with an increasingly militarized police force. We have essentially created a war to force a disproportionate moral code on all Americans. Now, the prohibition of illegal drugs has not only failed in its promises, but it's actually created additional serious and disturbing problems throughout our society. Now, repealing the prohibition of drugs, that does not mean that we endorse their use. It's very simply a call for different or wiser health and law enforcement and public health policies. Now, here in the United States, the prohibition has given control of the production and distribution of drugs to cartels and street gangs. Now, this very simply promotes disrespect for law enforcement, and this also reinforces the ethnic and generational divides between the public and law enforcement. Now, every year, more than 3/4 million Americans are arrested for marijuana possession. Just marijuana possession alone. That's far more than all of those arrested for violent crimes in America. Think about that for a minute. We're arresting more people in America just for possessing marijuana than we're arresting for violent crimes. And a lot of violent crimes are now going unsolved, unprosecuted. Now, the cost of just marijuana prohibition exceeds $12 billion a year. The cost of drug prohibition exceeds $85 billion a year. There's not less drugs in the Republic of the United States. There is more. There's not less crime. There's more. The cost of government is not smaller. It's vastly greater, and the respect for law enforcement has not increased, but it's diminished as a result of this. Now, as Americans, everybody, every single one of us, we need to urge our leaders to support the passage of legislation to remove these penalties and to change the conversation, to regulate the use and production and sale, as is done with other addictive and deadly and dangerous substances, such as liquor. The promotion of the continued production of what we're doing here in this country of the prohibition is just very simply tearing this country apart. And what we need to do is change that and have a conversation so that we can finally ring these bells of freedom, because it's been a while.
Larry, I was wondering if you could talk. You mentioned. Thank you very much for that. You mentioned that you did not join the Navy to combat drugs. I imagine that's true of most people who became police officers as well. Why is the U.S. military involved in the drug war?
Well, why is the Drug Enforcement Agency involved in the drug war in Mexico? I mean, that's, as a military guy, I have to ask that question. Where we send drug enforcement agents to different parts of the world in drug interdiction, and we send military people to different parts of the world to deal with insurgents. Well, the military is involved in the drug trade largely because it's an incredibly lucrative opportunity for the military. There's a counter-drug office in the military that handles the money that comes from various programs funneled throughout the United States government. And this big pot of money is then accessible to military unit commanders. And what that enables military to do is use that money for missions that may be associated with counter-drugs. So what we've done with counter-drug money, for instance, in the Republic of Panama, our particular unit was involved in foreign internal defense missions. So that would be, we would send a unit of people down to train a foreign military or police department on military interdiction operations, law enforcement operations. And then from the interdiction side, this goes back to the 1980s when Reagan just started his Say No campaign to drugs, and we started drug interdiction operations in and around the Caribbean Ocean, where we had a large amount of cocaine coming through. And something about government bureaucracies and government programs, once you turn them off, They rarely ever turn them on. They rarely get turned off. So once we started funneling money into an account for counter drugs for the military, then it was just a fool. It was a food bowl for the military and every military unit to try to get into that food bowl to get a piece of that money to justify more work and more jobs and just growth. It's just government bureaucracy at its finest.
Larry?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Peter here. I just want to, I think, make a correction. I think you said that we spend $12 million a year on marijuana and $83 million a year on all other drugs. I think that's billion. Billion, right? Okay. I just want to. I thought you said billion. I just want to make sure everybody understands we're talking about $12 billion and $83 billion.
I was saying in my head billion. I can't believe that came out of my mouth wrong. Thank you very much for that change, Chris, for that fix. I was saying billion. I'm trying to say trillion.
Hey, Larry, this is Neill. You mentioned when we were moving towards this drug-free America, you mentioned a couple of cartel organizations that you guys took down for cocaine. So we should have less cocaine coming into the country. Is that not true?
Well, that was, that's absolutely right. We were talking about the Cali and the Medellin cartels, and I worked for General Bowray and the gentleman that took over as the drug czar for President Bill Clinton, and the name escapes me, but I worked for him.
McCaffrey.
Thank you. Barry McCaffrey. So the idea was from the State Department, from President Reagan on down, and Barry McCaffrey was he was the SINC, and that's commanding officer in charge of everything that's south of, let's say, south of Texas at the time. That get counted into the South American foray. So he was in charge of all that. So what he believed, and after working with the CIA and State Department, that if we were to cut off the heads of those cartels, that we could stem the flow of cocaine. We would then begin to control it. Now, there was a large conversation with large numbers of people throughout various different government organizations that didn't believe that would be the case, that we had evidence that showed that there would be a distributed network that would just simply pop up and fill in the void. Very much like, Neill, how you guys have to deal with that same kind of concept on the street. When you get rid of a drug dealer, there's another guy that's going to pop up, pull the drugs out of his pocket and say, you know what? I'm here now and I can sell it to you cheaper. That's exactly what happened when we got rid of the big cartels. It's the same concept. It's the same program, whether it's a dealer on the street, a dealer in a building in downtown Atlanta, or if it's a cartel leader that's in South America. The minute that you got rid of that guy, that void, that huge organized void was filled up by hundreds of individuals. And therefore, we had, after the takedown of the Cali and the Medellin cartels, we didn't have less cocaine. We had more. We didn't have less crime. We didn't have less killing. We had more. It ballooned. It got so bad.
So the federal government, they tout the success in Colombia, that you were referring to, of reducing the tonnage of cocaine significantly coming out of Colombia. So what happened? If they had this wonderful success in Colombia, where's the cocaine coming from?
Well, that's where the guys in Bolivia, the guys in Brazil, the guys in Peru, and then the guys in Mexico, because then Mexico became the next big producer and distributor of cocaine. It got picked up by everybody else. And we were seeing that happen just as we were down in Panama and as we took out the Cali and the Medellin cartel, our focus immediately turned to Bolivia. And we were doing Bolivian operations, and then Belize, and then Colombia again, and then Peru. And then we pretty much lost control while we were down there. And I didn't want to be involved in that unit and that kind of work anymore, and I left after that. It was sickening. It was really sickening. I've talked to so many DEA agents who disagreed with the way that we went. At least at one point in time, we had some level, and it's not a good word to say, but we had some level of control. We had some level of monitoring with the Cali and the Medellin cartels. We could see the drugs coming across. We all know that the real answer is going to be a regulation,
right?
Tax and regulate. It just doesn't work.
And I think the problem that you're highlighting right there, and this is Mike Cindrich from San Diego, is that we've been focusing on the supply, and if you cut one head off, another 10 heads spring up. And I think you hit the nail right on the head there. Is we need to focus on the demand, and we need to focus on the issues here in our country. And I think that will help a lot of the things that are happening in South America and other countries abroad.
Right. And, one thing that's always interesting to me, of course, is as the federal government tries to implement Plan Merida in Mexico, they often cite Colombia as an example of how we can be successful by offering that sort of aid package. But, today the murder rate in Colombia is higher than the murder rate in Mexico. But nobody talks about that. We continue to hold that and as you mentioned, the toppling of the cartels back in the day as a metric of success. Mike, I was wondering, the military involvement in the war on drugs and the international U.S. effort in the war on drugs, I think raises some legal questions. And I understand that admiralty law and international law are sort of distinct. But, is it legal for the United States to be doing that, right? Is the extraterritorial authority under Title 21, 959, where we can indict a foreign national who's never stepped foot in the United States? Is it legal for us to send Navy and Coast Guard vessels all around the hemisphere interdicting foreign flagged vessels in search of drugs? I mean, are there any? It seems that there are a lot of legal issues that arise, and then I don't hear them challenged very often.
No, I think the legality is extremely questionable, I think international law, when you look at it, it wouldn't really allow many of the things that the United States government has been doing. However, because of this general consensus that we need to fight this war and that things need to be done, I think a lot of countries are probably just kind of turning the other way and letting us do this. I guess they must be thinking that the benefits outweigh the costs, so they're just turning their heads. But yeah, I think it raises some very important issues, and I think in many cases it's not legal what our government is doing.
That's interesting, and of course we see in certain countries in Latin America the beginning of some pushback against the U.S. Big stick approach to drug policy. Uruguay, of course, and statements that have been made by Mexican leaders, and particularly former Mexican leaders as well. So it's interesting. Larry, I was wondering, I think an experience for many people in LEAP is that even before their retirement or resignation, and even before formally joining on with LEAP, that they knew coworkers who felt the same way, who were sympathetic. I mean, this isn't something that, one officer in every department comes to realize, that the war on drugs is a failure. I was wondering how your fellow sailors felt about the war on drugs, interdiction strategy, and the use of military forces to implement that strategy.
For the most part, it's getting the job done, and let's just get the job done. I got that attitude a lot from when I start sitting down and talking to policy. I guess when I've talked to some very senior military officers, some of them have agreed. I think it really does take someone to be shown. It takes an education experience, maybe an epiphany, a come to Jesus moment for some people before they get it. I was one of those guys. It wasn't until we were conducting an operation and it was in Bolivia. We were training a foreign internal defense Bolivian Special Forces unit to conduct drug interdiction training. And so in one particular instance, we went out to this field in Bolivia. We flew in early in the morning to a house that was on a track of other houses. It was on a Bolivian hillside. Houses were separated by several hundred yards, but each of them had probably 3 to 5, maybe 10 acres, depending on the house, of a tract of land. And each one of these houses, they grew coca. And that's what they did. It's what these people had done for generations, and it was a family that lived in the house, and that's what they did. They had their land, they grew coca, they sold coca, they got up, they made breakfast. It's what they did every day. And there was a neighborhood of houses that did this. So we flew in with the Bolivian Special Forces early one morning to one of these houses, and we were there as advisors, and I watched the Bolivian Special Forces run into this house. And, of course, I'm expecting them to pull out some guy with no teeth, looks like Pablo Escobar, what they pulled out was 7 kids. I'll never forget those children. I pulled out 7 kids, flex cuffed them on the ground. The youngest was crying. She was 1, 2, 3 years old, flex cuffed on the ground. And they pulled out the mother and the father. Then they went out there with a helicopter. In the helicopters, they brought out fuel, and they burned their house down, and they burned down that tract of coca. So I was asking the unit commander, and I was asking my commanding officer at the time, who was standing right there as the officer in charge, why the hell are we doing this? What are we doing? This is not moral. This isn't correct. This isn't American. This isn't Christian. This isn't right. And I said, all we're doing today is we're making enemies of the United States and the Bolivian government. Why the hell are you doing that? And they said, well, this is what interdiction is. This is what we do. And then they sent those people marching down the street with no Red Cross to help them. They didn't even arrest them. They just burned everything that they had. That's my come to Jesus moment. And that was a come to Jesus moment that everybody I stood with, every American that stood there that day, realized what we had done. And so we tried to educate the rest of our chain of command. There was a lot of consternation within our organization internally as a result of that one particular operation, and there was some discussions, high-level discussions above my head, and I don't know what was ever said. We continued to do those operations, and then I quit that unit, and I went on to different things. So to answer your question, there's a lot of good people in the military, and I'm going to tell you that most of those people, they believe in that oath that they swore to serve and protect the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And you got a large sleeping force of the United States out there who aren't against the citizens. These are people who are mostly, if educated and shown, would agree with us here today. I wish we could make some of this kind of stuff mandatory training for military, Constitution training. I think that would help. I hope I answered your question.
That's a very interesting response, Larry, because when you mention training, educating the troops as to what this really is and what's happening. There's been some discussion about doing the same thing in law enforcement academies. How many of these young police officers, if they really knew what this was all about and the damage that's being done to our communities and to the citizens, would they just march out there and follow orders? Would they just see this as, hey, we're the executive branch of the government. All we do is enforce the policies that are placed in front of us. And I think that's what we need to figure out. That's what we need to do more of, and figure out how we do that, how we educate more people who are in positions of responsibility for enforcing these policies, both in the military, in the DEA, law enforcement in our communities. How do we do that? How can we do that? One of the big problems that we have with law enforcement here in the U.S. is that it's a very closed culture. Most cops have cops as friends, and it truly has become this us versus them society. And so, getting into that culture, breaking through that shell, educating these police officers, and at the end of the day, having them become stronger advocates for ending this policy.
Yeah, I think the hierarchy, creates an issue, especially in the military. I'm sure, I'm not former military, but I can imagine. But, from my experience at the district attorney's office, we take an oath to uphold the Constitution and uphold the laws of the state of California. But really, it's not my decision which cases I'm going to prosecute or which cases I'm going to dismiss. I mean, I may feel that I have a case that, this case needs to be dismissed. Either, we didn't follow the proper procedures in search and seizure or whatever, but it's really not my choice. It's my supervisor's choice, and it's their supervisor's choice. And really, the people at the bottom kind of just have to take the marching orders. And I think it's going to take people who realize that, hey, if I'm not, if I don't feel strongly about this, and I'm taking orders from someone, and and I feel I'm not upholding my oath, then I need to do something about it. And whether it's take a stance right there, or just leave that position and go to another side and promote the ideals that you took the oath to uphold. And I think that's going to be extremely important. And that really just comes down to the citizen, and that comes down to just keeping faith that there are good people in law enforcement, that there are good people in the military, that there are good people in the prosecuting agencies that will either take a stand or leave and do something different.
Mike, if we could just follow up on that a little bit. One thing that struck me during my time with DEA is how incredibly stacked the cards are in favor of the government in drug cases. The vast majority, of course, at the federal level plead out because of that stacking of the deck. The ones that go to court are almost always result in conviction. In theory, we have a system of innocent until proven guilty, and the bar for a successful prosecution should be very, very high. But that seems not to be the case. I mean, it seems that the system increasingly, I don't want to use the word rigged because that would imply corruption, but it certainly seems to favor prosecutors over defendants. And I was just wondering, do you think most drug case defendants get a fair trial and are treated fairly by the judicial system?
No, most don't think so. I think the system is absolutely stacked. Even from the initial arraignment and bail hearing, when you're making a bail argument, the court has to assume that everything that the prosecutor is saying is true. So they assume that the police report and that these statements that everything's true, and then bail gets set, and oftentimes people can't even get out of custody to fight their case. And many times these are innocent people. Even more so in California, when we see with the medical marijuana defense, the medical marijuana laws in California, they don't protect you from arrest. They give you a defense in court should you get prosecuted. So you may get a DA's office that just doesn't like the laws, doesn't agree with them, and they're going to arrest and prosecute everyone. Leave it up to you to defend yourself in court. But that's even if you're in full compliance with the law, you still get arrested. You still have to post bail. You have to hire an attorney. You have to go to court and have to go through all that. And even if you win at the end, you're still out of pocket several $1,000s and, time in your life that you spent and all the stress of being in court. But I think absolutely the cards are stacked against defendants in just about every case. And I think, unfortunately, the general population just feels, hey, if someone's sitting in the defendant's chair, they must have done something, which we know is not always the case.
No, that's right. And, the bar for an indictment is virtually non-existent. And I can't believe that that's how, by design, the system was supposed to work. It's unheard of, at least in my experience, for an AUSA to want to indict an individual and have the grand jury come back and not indict. So it certainly seems unfair. And as you mentioned, expensive. Right, and affects people in ways, even if they are ultimately not convicted. It's still a huge disruption and a cost.
Well, I tell you, if you really wanted a more fair system, judicial system, then every case should be a jury trial. There should be no plea bargains. Everybody should be judged by their peers and have that opportunity. But this plea system, the use of public defenders whose caseloads are just ungodly in the numbers, and the way charges are stacked up upon someone, a person or a suspect, are in many cases improper, and which forces them into some sort of plea deal. But if you want a fair system, then everyone should have a jury trial. Everyone should have the opportunity to present and defend their case in front of their peers. And especially for these drug laws that we currently have, I think that if that were the case, you'd have far fewer people being convicted and going to and spending time in prison. And then because of that, you would probably have far fewer people ever being charged in the first place.
Just as a quick comment, I want to remind the audience that for this whole 2-hour show, everybody that you are listening to here has been involved in depriving people of their liberty because of the drug war. We have all enforced these laws, and we've done it, whether we've prosecuted, whether we've been police officers, whether we've been in the military. We're not talking about this from some outside view. We're talking about this from a deep inside view of our old profession, and we know what we're capable of doing, and we know what we are absolutely incapable of doing because it is contrary to the concept of law enforcement. So I just want to remind everybody of who they're listening to on this.
I think Neill made a solid point. The plea bargain system is it's just a horrible system. I mean, especially in federal court, but even in state court, we'll see the prosecutors, they'll just charge any possible offense that you can even think of. They'll throw it all against the wall and see what sticks. The problem is they make the offers, prior to a preliminary hearing, and they say, hey, if your client goes to preliminary hearing, all offers are off the table. Well, I know that I can get some of those charges dismissed at prelim, but if we go forward, some of them are going to stand, and then my clients might not be able to get as good of a deal after preliminary hearing. So, it really, in some cases, I strongly believe is unethical. I get prosecutors that file a case, they issue charges, and they come to me at the first court hearing and say, you're going to file a motion to suppress evidence, aren't you? Yes, I am. because, of course, my client's rights were violated. Truly what the prosecutor's office should be doing is looking at these cases and saying, you know what, this person's rights were violated. We shouldn't file charges in this case. But what they do is they file charges and then they force us to file motions and hope that we get a judge that will listen to that motion and will consider the law and grant that motion. But really, the prosecuting agencies should be not issuing cases when they see violations of constitutional rights.
Right. One of the I think abuses in that system and in how the prosecutorial system works, and within law enforcement as well, is how informants, right, human confidential sources, are recruited, used, compensated. And I was just wondering how you feel about that technique. Do you think the government relies on it too heavily? Is it dangerous? Have you seen any particular abuses in that?
Was that question for Mike?
Yes, I'm sorry, Mike. Yes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see it all the time, and in many cases we see it where someone they get busted for personal use or small level dealing, and then they get forced to be an informant, and it's basically, hey, lose your freedom or help us take away someone else's freedom, and it is used, it is abused. And we see it all too often, and unfortunately, oftentimes these informants they are considered confidential. And one thing that we like to do is we like to file motions to try to learn the identity of those informants, because they may have information that can help with our case. And I think when you're relying on this, you need to see, okay, well, has this person actually given information in the past that's helped in these in law enforcement investigations, and to what extent have they? Because oftentimes that's what's relied upon for warrants and for allowing the use of these informants and allowing them to remain confidential, is that they have served a certain function in the past. But we really don't get an opportunity to challenge that without knowing who they are and what type of information they've provided. But I think there is definitely an abuse in the system with confidential informants.
Yeah, for working with the two largest police agencies in the state of Maryland, when I was with the Maryland State Police, we had a very regulated and tightly controlled CI system and program where you had to document every single minute you spent with an informant, every single bit of information coming from an informant. When we did control buys, we really did strip searches of those informants, of those CIs. And it was a very regulated, controlled, and also reviewed program. Now go to Baltimore City, and you're looking at a completely different animal. There were abuses around every corner. As a matter of fact, they even reflected some of the abuses, unfortunately, in the HBO series The Wire. And if you do not know how to properly manage a CI, mainly those who are under the gun and who will do just about anything not to spend any time in prison, you're really you're biting off more than you can chew, and we do end up, unfortunately, charging and convicting people who were in fact innocent because of the lack of oversight and control of the CI program in Baltimore.
And Larry, does you mentioned you were on the ground in Bolivia, but probably not where you expected to find yourself joining the Navy. But does the U.S. military use informants overseas as well for drug, not cases, but interdiction and eradication efforts?
Not too much. No, we get the military doesn't do a lot of these independently. They work with a support structure, an organization, a joint command called JIATF, Joint Intelligence. I forgot what the rest of it, Task Force, Joint Intelligence Analyst Task Force or something like that. There used to be a couple of those commands. They've reorganized into one, and they're in Miami, Florida now. So what the Navy does is they might have a ship at sea or unit on the ground. There is a central command that knows where all these units are at, and they will task them, and it's a fleet surveillance unit that's out in Chesapeake, Virginia. So they'll task these in units with the ones that are mobile, that are moving, with prosecuting a ship or a plane or something along those lines. If you guys remember, some years ago there was a shoot down of an aircraft over in Peru, Andean Ridge area. Mm-hmm. That was from this command in Virginia. They were involved with that particular shoot down, and that they did not order it. I'll reiterate that it was a Peruvian fighter jet that ultimately shot down that aircraft, and that was ultimately against the orders of the military that didn't want to prosecute that plane. It showed signs that it was a prosecutable target, that it was probably carrying drugs, but they didn't know for sure. Aircraft ordered it down and it crashed. So they shot it down. I'm sorry. So I hope did that answer your question?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was just wondering. I mean, yeah, you're right, because sort of what assets are used to to pinpoint, as you mentioned, the coca grow earlier.
And we might have radars over an area. As far as the use of informants, let's say we teach that to the foreign intelligence agents. So if we're working with the Bolivian Special Forces, we're teaching the Bolivian Special Forces how to operate as a law enforcement and a military entity. So in that particular instance, when they prosecuted that target that was out in Bolivia, which was the house with the kids in the coca field, that particular target was chosen by them because of an informant or something along those lines gave them information. What we were worried about as we were watching these foreign governments begin to develop the culture where they had informants, that things were actually being done very politically. Why did they choose that house over the house next door? Well, ultimately, I think the answer was that somebody in law enforcement didn't like the guy that lived in that house, or there was something personal involved. So they chose that house for that reason. Whereas we have checks and balances in place, and we try to ensure those types of things don't happen. That doesn't necessarily happen in foreign governments. They don't have a lot of the laws in place already to keep that from happening. So, yeah, while our military doesn't use informants, there are informants ultimately that are used.
Right. Mike, I was wondering, I'm sure you saw John Schiffman from Reuters' article about the DEA's use of classified information, particularly phone information, and how that's passed to field agents through the Special Operations Division. And then, when it reaches the point of being judicialized, right, agents and prosecutors are instructed to kind of work what's called parallel construction, where they reconstruct the information that was obtained from a classified source in a way that can be presented to a judge and a jury in the judicial process. I was really wondering what your thoughts are on that. Some attorneys have raised constitutional questions and whether that process violates the rules for discovery. Would you have a problem with as a former prosecutor, with an agent using that tactic?
Well, as a former prosecutor, now a defense attorney, I have a huge problem with that, and I'm pretty appalled at the fact that they do that. It definitely goes against everything that the discovery process stands for. I mean, part of protecting our constitutional rights, the constitutional rights of our clients, is seeing the procedures and the exact procedures that were followed when obtaining evidence and obtaining information that's going to be used against someone. And when you kind of deconstruct that and put it back together, you're taking the truth out of how it really happened, and you take away our ability to be able to test the constitutionality of those procedures. So, I have a huge issue with it, and I just, I can't stress enough how people's rights are being violated on a daily basis, and it's hard enough. There's so much stacked against us as defense attorneys and representing defendants, and then to add another layer like that, to where even the prosecutor doesn't necessarily know everything that took place. And the prosecutor does have a certain duty to investigate and try to determine exactly what discovery exists. And they can't really use as an excuse, we didn't know about it, or they didn't give us that information. They have a duty to investigate and to try to find out that information. But when you have the actual agency that's doing the investigating, covering up certain things and changing around the way that it was actually done, and then giving it to the prosecutor, I mean, I can't stress enough how much that just violates our constitutional rights, and I'm appalled at it.
Sean?
Yes.
You're still there? I want to jump in because we're coming up on to the end of this, and at 153, we're going to turn it back over to Casper. And I just wanted to say to Neill, if you want to do a little plug for Leap, Neill, and tell us if there's anything coming up that you want to mention or anything like that.
Well, sure. First of all, I want to make sure that everyone who's listening has gone onto the LEAP website, which is leap.cc, or copssaylegalizedrugs.com. And make sure you have signed on as a supporter to this wonderful organization. So that's first and foremost. As far as what lies ahead for LEAP, many things lie ahead, but there's one thing that I want to point out is that for you listeners who realize that we have to make a serious change regarding our drug policy in this country, and many of you know some of your political leaders, your delegates, senators, even your city council members, and some of our members on Capitol Hill, you don't have to be the one to try to explain this to them. If you reach out to LEAP, you can do that through our website. If at all possible, and in most of the times it is, we will send someone with you. We will partner someone with you, one of our wonderful speakers to go with you to meet with one of your political leaders in urging them to support drug policy reform in this country and support some of the legislation that is out there that needs to be passed. So I just wanted to make that clear. Reach out to us, contact our Speakers Bureau, get a speaker in your area for your local Rotary, for your local Kiwanis Club, colleges, universities, anyone, any group. We will come share our message and help end this disastrous drug war.
Well, thank you very much, Neill. I want to thank everybody that was involved in this today. I think this is a very powerful 2 hours, and I hope a lot of people listen to it. I'm going to end this one for my part by saying what I usually say at the end of the regular Time for Hemp show, and that is bad things happen because good people stay silent. Casper?
Well, it really has been quite an honor to be part of this historic broadcast and to be able to bring it to my audience. I want to thank the members of LEAP, and I also want to thank Darby there at LEAP for all the work she's done, and let everybody know how important it is to get involved with LEAP. There's a lot of excellent speakers there that are willing to come out into any community to help let people know how important it is to end prohibition. The reason for this particular broadcast and the other broadcasts that have been occurring on Fridays, each 2 hours, no commercial break, uninterrupted, it's because, as I said at the top of this, it is sad that this is such an important discussion. It's going on not just coast to coast, but globally. So many lives are affected by the policies that are in place, yet we cannot get a hearing in front of our own leaders to discuss the reasons why prohibition needs to end. So Time for Hemp has put together this global presentation, and we are asking you, the members of our audience, to pick up the torch where we have to leave it, and that is at your doorstep. It is important that you take these MP3s. You'll find them at timeforhemp.com very easily on the home page. They'll be easy to access. We also have a press release discussing this, and to send these to your leaders here in Washington, D.C. and all around the world so that everybody knows how important it is to take Time for Hemp.
Don't cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yes, it's time for hemp. Whoa, an acre of hemp makes 20 bales of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all.